Welcome back, everyone, to the Burnout Club. This is a place where we explore burnout and success one expert and experiment at a time. I'm your host, Patrice Bonfiglio, and today I'm joined by Melissa Petro. She's a journalist and author of Shame on You, How to Be a Woman in the Age of Mortification. Now, that leads me to have tons of questions. Can't wait to dive in. And I just want to honor all of the publications that you've been in. I mean, you've been in Washington Post, Allure, InStyle, Cosmo, Good Housekeeping, more and more, which I won't keep naming. But congrats on all of the success that you've had. Welcome to the show.
Speaking of burnout, most of that was done when my kids were like toddlers and I just couldn't not, cling to my career. So thank you.
Yeah, this is the place for you. Oh, well, why don't you give an intro to the Burnout Club audience? So who are you?
So like you said, I'm a cultural journalist. I've been working as a freelance writer, writing coach, and now author for I started maybe 10 or 15 years ago. Prior to that, I was a public school teacher. I worked for the New York City Department of Education for about three years, I think. 4 years. Oof, I should know, right?
I'm the same way.
Yeah, integral detail of my story, whatever. I was working as a public school teacher right when I had started writing and publishing mostly personal essays about myself and my experience prior to becoming a public school teacher. And that is when I worked in the sex industry. So I was writing about those experiences, making meaning of that. And my byline was discovered by the New York Post, and they put it together with another piece of information on the internet that I was a public school teacher. And then it became a national story for a while. I ultimately lost my career as a public school teacher and became who I am now.
Wow.
So
I think most people cannot imagine being the spectacle in that way. How long did that whole period last for you?
So I didn't have this term at the time, but we can describe it now as mass media humiliation. I was put on the cover of the New York Post. Bronx teacher admits I'm an ex-hooker, which I did admit in print. In an article on the Huffington Post, I talked about the rights and dignity of individuals with experiences in the sex trades and a very modest op-ed. And I had used my first person experience to support the arguments that I was making in that piece. That really just kicked it off. They just targeted me for months. I was out of the classroom. They put you in what's called the rubber room. So you go to like administrative duties, but there really aren't any duties to be done. It's just punishment. You sit at a desk and do nothing all day long until basically they can fire you, which is what ultimately happened. It was like maybe 8 months of sitting there in detention, thinking about what I had done.
Oh my gosh. Oh, so now looking back on that experience, do you wish that from your standpoint you had done anything differently, like during that whole period of the spectacle and like trying to maintain who you are and, what you want to do with the rest of your life while it seems
it's really interesting. For the book, Shame on You, I had the privilege of interviewing other women who'd experienced mass media humiliation. And I dove into other, well-known people like Amanda Knox or others who'd just been mercilessly discredited publicly. And that it happens to women disproportionately. And we do it to ourselves in private ways all the time, which was the premise of the book. It's just such an exhausting and, just agonizing experience. And I think what makes it even worse is that we're oftentimes always asking ourselves this question, what should I or could I have done differently? Right? The moment we are a target of humiliation, we we want to take blame because we want to avoid it in the future, right? So of course, when this started to happen to me, I was like, what could I have done differently? What should I have done differently? And the truth about a lot of behavior, a lot of the choices we make or the things we do is, we did the best we could at that time with what we knew, right? I was so incredibly naive. Again, this is a word I heard again and again from women who'd experienced humiliation and abuse, that they were naive. We don't expect to be humiliated, to be the target. We think, what could I have done differently? What should I shouldn't have been wearing that. I shouldn't have been drinking. I shouldn't have, as a culture and as individuals, we've really internalized this belief that it's my responsibility to keep myself safe and to keep you from victimizing me. So when I look back at that experience, there's lots of things I know differently now, but at the time I didn't know better. I never thought in my wildest fears or dreams that I would become such a target and that I had that power, even that anyone cared enough about who I was to turn me into that kind of spectacle. The only thing I could have done differently is to have known more, to have been more media literate. And I wasn't.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. So let's talk about kids that we're raising now, right? So I have 2 daughters. I know you have children. Is there anything that we can, I think it's a delicate balance, right? But how do we prepare them not to be so naive, but without overloading them with such drastic
and over responsibility? It's don't be naive. It's your responsibility to avoid harm. I'm probably err on the side of permissive when it comes to media use and living publicly. I don't take responsibility for the harms that befall me or my family. Even recently I had a piece published on Business Insider about my special needs son's education that the Daily Mail picks up. And then they turn it into a story about this woman is using your taxpayer money to pay for her son's very expensive kindergarten, basically willfully misconstruing our stories. And aren't our images, especially women's, willfully, purposely misconstrued, taken out of context, and abused? I am not responsible for the abuse that befalls me. Now, I don't want harm done to my children. How can I avoid that, right? And how do I keep myself safe today? I think it's really this delicate balance. And I think that, I really work towards a culture that is more permissive about people living truthfully and openly, where you won't be humiliated or shamed for being who you are, and that you can be yourself without fear of self-incrimination or punishment. Can it still happen? Absolutely. And then that's really when shame resilience comes into play, because how we respond to those traumatic events, because let's face it, it's pretty traumatic when someone abuses and humiliates you. That's really what I try to teach my children, how to be resilient, to be themselves, to be public, to let go and allow themselves to be vulnerable and authentic. And then when there's an unfortunate consequence to that, how to move through those feelings.
I think most people are still trying to learn how to move through those.
We do. And we really live in this culture of shaming and shame, where it's just easier to say nothing or to just present something that's super palatable. The exterior stays really neat. We're underneath that. We're chaotic. We're confused. We're overworking ourselves, trying to live up to this perfectionistic portrait of existence that just doesn't feel true.
Yeah.
The more we can kind of reconcile our lived experience with our outwardly presentation, for me, the more cohesive and whole and healthy I feel.
Yeah.
Even when that backlash does come, and it comes.
Yeah. I think that's a huge reminder in that everybody's got so much going on. What percentage of you is actually visible or honest with the outside world? Not that you need to spill all your beans, but just to not feel like you have to keep up a pretense.
Right. You know, we all have what's called concealable stigmatized identities. These are the things that like you wouldn't necessarily know this to be true about me unless I tell you.
Yeah.
And the more we're able to reconcile ourselves with the potentially stigmatized self, for me personally, the more just relaxed and relieved I feel, the less I feel I need to put up a pretense, the less effortful life feels when I can just be transparent. And you're right. Like, we don't have to like walk around like, unloading on every single person.
That's not good either.
That's not vulnerability either. But like when you can just kind of live with these truths of ourselves.
Yeah.
And yeah, maybe if someone asks you how you're doing, you can say, I had a rough morning, but I'm grateful to be here. That kind of, living in the truth is what I hope to do and what I hope to inspire others to do.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's just a relief sometimes. And I think that's why I wanted to have the Burnout Club to begin with, because in all of these private conversations we were talking about it, like, if everybody's just not okay, let's bring it to the forefront, right?
Right.
Then we can start doing something about it.
And I think sometimes we really, there's probably some sort of psychological term maybe it's even just project, like there's that thing that really makes us uncomfortable in ourselves. Mm-hmm. And as a result, I'm going to make sure my kitchen's like constantly spotless, or as a result, I'm just really going to overachieve at work, because there's this other thing, that thing that just you fear makes you inadequate. And maybe it's something you're completely not responsible for, a parent's addiction, or, financial insecurity, or, something that you're not necessarily improving by like making sure your kids are like perfectly dressed, or, all of these things that we really focus our attention on and exhaust ourselves with that just aren't scratching that itch. They're not really making us feel contented in ourselves. If anything, we're just becoming less content because it's an impossible expectation and it's not really what we're yearning for.
Right. Oh, that's so true. Do you think that the journalism industry is moving forward in a more positive way to try to get to that point where, we expect people to be human and have pasts and have things that aren't perfect? Or is it really still stuck?
I think social media has been like a blessing and a curse, because now we have all of these narratives. It's not just like 3 TV stations anymore, right? Yeah. Like there's millions of voices that are clamoring for our attention, right? So I think it can be, there's a temptation to follow a certain kind of narratives that we expect, or, and then there's like this like something that can subtly happen is that we start to follow aspirational narratives or images like on TV or on like Instagram or TikTok, aspirational, like it's beautiful. I wish I looked like that. I wish my life looked like that. And I think that can be really harmful because their lives don't look like that, right? Our narratives are sort of flattened once they reach the media. You don't see everything. You see a picture. Mm-hmm. So I think we also have an opportunity. So that's the risk. But there's an opportunity also to find narratives that make us feel restored and seen, and that sort of feed our authentic beast and that reaffirm us. And because there's just so much to choose from. So if we're really mindful in our media consumption, I think we can find narratives today that uplift us and that make us feel connected and strengthen our feeling of belonging. But we have to be mindful because there's so many messages competing for our attention. Go to the ones that make you feel good.
I like that. So like if all the listeners were doing an audit of who they follow on social media or what they consume, like what is your percentage of things that you are consuming that is aspirational versus connected?
Listen, I'm like a preaching, but not perfect at this. Like if the amount of plastic surgery that has somehow infiltrated my time, like the algorithm knows what I do not like about myself, right? And it's constantly feeding me. Oh my God, it was so insidious today. This morning, it was like, a facelift that's gone wrong. And I'm like, all right, I want to see that because that would really, it was like, it wasn't, it didn't go wrong. It was like, it tricked me. Yeah, you can't click on them. You have to unfollow.
Yeah.
The second you see it, you have to. So like my timelines, there's a lot that gets in there that's reaffirming this idea that like, I'm not quite right. This is imperfect. Here's a way to make it perfect. This is what you should look like. This is what your home should look like. And some of it, I love gardening. I look at like beautiful gardens that my garden will never be. Like I just don't have the sunlight or whatever.
Yeah.
And I still follow them. And it doesn't really make me feel less than. I think it's about being honest with ourselves. You know, the gardening stuff, that's a little aspirational and just, I take pleasure in it. Does it feel pleasurable and joyous? Or is it more like keto diets where I'm like, oh, should I be really? Is that realistic for me? Should I, those aren't feeling good. We can feel the grasping. We can feel the, inadequacy. Then, those are things to move away from.
Oh, that's so good.
And they come back just like weeds, speaking of gardens, and then you just have to kind of.
Yeah, it was so interesting. I noticed that the feed for one account I had made up specifically for the Burnout Club as opposed to my regular one, it was so different because the algorithm was just assuming what I would like. And I was like, oh my goodness, like I don't want to see any of this. It's just like, please no. So you really have to be intentional about forming it to be something healthy for you.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting. Another example, not to digress too much, but like I clicked on a woman who was speaking about her alopecia one time because I love truth tellers, right? Like, and it was storytelling and I was reading the comments and people were really supportive. But then I just got all of this alopecia content. Like that was not quite that, but yeah, I really do. Like I try to surround myself with really joyous, positive, self-assured older women because I like speaking of aspiration, like I would like to grow old gracefully, whatever that means, grow old in an empowered way, like not, I don't want to. So finding like those mentors and following those voices, finding people who are just reaffirming what I know and love to be true about myself rather than what I think I should be. And I'm not quite. So
what is it like working with authors or people that maybe don't know if they're actually authors yet, but they're dabbling with writing?
So when I started writing through Gotham Writers Workshop, which is an iconic institution in New York City. It's like a community writing organization. And I took a memoir writing course. And then 10 years later, when I lost my job, I started teaching that class. I had an MFA in creative nonfiction and I had been writing a memoir for some time. But it was really an opportunity to give myself and my then students permission to ask and answer essential questions about storytelling and truth telling, because you're right. We don't necessarily identify as writers, but we know we have a story that needs to be told. So it's about excavating that story and crafting it so that your readers can hear it and feel it, importantly. And then experiencing the power of that is, unparalleled. When I was able to start telling my story and have it received by people and have it and honored and improved as craft, it's kind of depersonalizing it a bit by making it a piece of writing rather than my lived experience anymore. There's something really empowering and reconnecting. So it really does heal us to tell our stories. It restores our connection and feeling of belonging, which is what shame threatens. It disconnects us when we feel like we have that thing we can't share. If you knew you'd like me less, I'm unlovable. In fact, if this were to be known, I have to hide it. When we start to bring that into the light and people start to accept it, maybe first we're curious, they're curious, and then we tell more and more. And until it's freed from us. There's something so liberating about being a part of that process, even as a listener.
Mm-hmm.
When your friend has a story that you can tell pains them.
Yeah.
It's painful that it's true. It's painful to have to share it. When you give someone permission to share that pain, it's a little less pain that they have to carry alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we create what's called a safe container for that person where it fills the space and it's lighter on ourselves. Because it's there, it's out.
I like that. And that's, I hear the term, I'm going to hold space for you all the time, but it's almost like it's become mocked more than anything. And like, oh, the younger generation just like needs, to hold space for everything. But what you're saying makes perfect sense for someone, right? Like why, if you are feeling shame or you are feeling negative about something, you're naturally going to retreat if you think it's threatening your inclusion and your friendships and your lovability. So yeah, releasing it, right? So if you unzip the bag and some of it just starts flowing out, then bag's a little lighter. I love that.
Right. And a space like a writing workshop or, a group therapy, 12-step programs, like these rooms with like many people in it, then it's not so much pressure one-on-one. Sometimes, and I've written about this in the book, we can disclose and be rejected because someone is just not prepared for our truth or they're just not the right audience, right? It affects them or they have no prior knowledge. So it can be pretty traumatic to disclose and then to have that rejection happen. It's almost worse than had you not disclosed, right?
Yeah.
So oftentimes instead of that one-on-one, unless we find someone we can really trust, oftentimes instead we can go to larger spaces, groups, or also like online. I think people use online spaces and even anonymity to sort of test the water and say, this is my experience and what I'm dealing with. And then they receive feedback and it's a cacophony of feedback. It's not just one person. There's maybe there's going to be one or two people in there who say something that's pretty condemning or, ignorant, but there's going to be other people who really get it. And that kind of being gotten feeling is just unparalleled. It's just a wonderful, wonderful relief.
So yeah, I always think of the online community as being so, dangerous. Like if I put myself out there, just like,
It can be that too. Again, it's about choosing the communities.
Yeah.
And choosing the content that we gravitate towards and participate in.
Yeah. Yeah. You're so right that if you have a burden and you're trying to share it and like test the waters, like you're saying, find a community, do that research and then do your test. Right. It's just that. Yeah. Okay. I see it all coming together now.
You're right. We can also be, we're still a culture of shame that's very quick to turn on someone in order to make ourselves feel better, honestly. Shame is entertaining and it's relieving because like, oh, you're making fun of them, not me. Oh, look, they made a mistake. Yeah. Not I didn't. It could very well be you next time who says the wrong thing or who's caught doing the thing. And when it's someone else, there's a real temptation to indulge in that. And culturally, we really do indulge in other people's humiliation. And, I think part of shifting that culture is opting out of those pile-ons. Yeah. And not participating in the culture when it happens, or even better, when we can step in and support someone who's being reduced to a caricature or to their worst flaws, because no one is that one thing, that one behavior or that one mistake that they've made. We're all deserved of regard. And
what do you find most restorative and enjoyable? Like if you wanted to do something entertaining for yourself, and I will caveat it because I know I send a short little survey before before the podcast, and I ask what's a fun fact about you,
I think writing was the first place where I was able to move through my emotions and really allow myself to experience the complexity of a feeling related to an experience. I felt safe to do that in a journal.
Mm-hmm.
I liked to write. I loved to write. It was soothing. And then I would write myself to a place of joy when I was able to really find the truth and reconnect myself to my goals and myself, because that's what, we lose when we're kind of mired in perfectionism and feelings of inadequacy. You just don't recognize how wonderful you really are. We're all just these people that deserve to be cherished and honored. So finding yourself again is really a joyous experience, right? So writing is a place where I can do that. I can just remember who I am, reacquaint myself with the person that I lost.
Yeah.
And friendships. I think talking to others who I feel I can entirely be myself, even when we're talking about something awful, it's, again, lighter because it's shared. You can find humor in anything because it's not an individual experience. We de-individualize it. When we share our stories, it becomes relatable and a human experience, not an individual one. So I think just, my favorite experience is when I run into a friend. I really struggle with the whole okay, on Tuesday of next week, we're going to do this thing. And I know I don't want to do it. I want to watch TV and go to bed early. Getting myself there. And then it's usually pleasurable, but the resistance to getting there. My favorite is when I'm hanging out in a coffee shop and a friend walks in and she sits down and we get to talk for an hour, and I don't want it to end, but there's nothing grueling about that. There's no lead up or anything. So those are probably the most joyous. And my kids bring me a lot of joy.
Oh, yeah.
And all the other things too, if I'm being.
Yeah. Parenting's hard. It's complicated. It's lovely, but there's a lot to unpack there. Are you, do you feel like you're still in the thick of it with parenting, or do you feel like your kids are at the point where they have their own personalities and can express themselves and what they like and dislike?
I remember when I used to talk to parents with slightly older kids, and they'd be like, "Oh, you're in the thick of it," and I didn't think it would ever end. What do you mean I'm in something that's going to end, right? And then now my kids are school aged, both of them, and it's oh, that's different. So I'm not in that. It's not triage anymore, where there's constant. So my kids,
we have a room now.
And then the whole bigger kids, bigger problems thing. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Then start to schlep around. And so I feel like I'm a little bit out of it, but sometimes I talk to a parent of an older child and they'll be like, "Oh, your kids are still young." Something will remind them, my kid, "Oh, you still need childcare. You can't leave them alone yet."
They can't drive away.
Yeah, they're not quite. So, but I wonder if I'm not in a real sweet spot of parenting, because they are their own people. They can do their own thing. They can get themselves cereal. Come on.
That was a big deal.
That's new. My youngest got herself. I know she only ate the marshmallows out of the Lucky Charm, but okay, but still,
it's still a milestone.
Okay, she can get. Technically, she had breakfast and she did it. It's just those sorts of things. My kid on Mother's Day said "Happy Mother's Day" unprompted. Was so excited. Had done the thing himself. That's some big boy shit, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all coming together. Yeah.
We're moving in the right direction.
It's nice to have those pops, those little surprises. I appreciate those too, because it breaks up the monotony and the difficulty of the logistics.
And it's nothing like it was. I mean, it was so young. Parenting very young children is so physically exhausting the sleep deprivation, like talk about burnout there. It's impossible the way our society is set up where it's like one or two individuals basically raising the, like, it's not, you just can't do it. It's almost impossible, which is to say it gets done, but like not well.
Yeah, like at the cost of your,
you
your
survive
sanity
it,
and everything.
But it's impossible to like, I do believe I couldn't have done it better. And I barely did it. But I actually feel today like I'm a person again.
All the listeners, right? Do you feel like a person today? Because there were definitely points in my life where I didn't. I had to stop and ask myself, like, what is going on?
No, you lose
in my
all
head,
autonomy.
right?
Like your body is no longer yours. I felt so degraded by motherhood. And it was so, I mean, for a long time, I had like the premise of my book was that like sex work and motherhood were the two most degrading experiences. And having to stay quiet about it, what made it all the worse, right? Because women with experiences in sex trades can't talk about it because then you're, criminalized and stigmatized. But also mothers, you really can't talk about the impact, not completely. But more so, it's becoming more prominent because of social media. There's more messaging. So it's more, and it's also, both things are true. Like it's the best experience and the worst experience. Those are both true at the same time. You can't say it both at the same time. So you have to, or you can, like I just did, but.
And everyone understands what you're saying.
Right.
But it goes back to your first point where just like, if you are showing all of yourself, and not trying to conceal like how difficult parenting is or what it's like, trying to work after not sleeping at all overnight, those things, they really do help as a society just understand, like, this is what's actually happening. You're not an abnormality, right? Your kid isn't doing anything different than the kid in the next house over. So we can get to a place where we're like trying to solve the lack of a village, right?
Right. And being really transparent about the resources you have or that you don't, because I feel as if I was, and sometimes still am, always asking this question, like, how are other people doing it? Like, how are they doing it? And then when you begin to answer that question, then you realize you're making choices. Yeah. Maybe the answer is, my house isn't clean. I showed up on time, but like I didn't do that. Or I have financial assistance from a family member, or we have childcare, or, there are ways we're doing it somehow, but like we don't all have the same resources and we don't all make the same choices. We don't all have all of it 100% of the time, like we might assume. So really getting granular about the choices people are making and the way life actually looks, I think for me is very relieving, because then it makes me comfortable with my choices. And you do realize we're all making sacrifices somewhere.
I like the agency part of what you're saying, right? So like, 'cause sometimes it just feels like a blur and it feels like, it's just so tough, but you have to remember that you are making choices. So try to either take ownership or feel good about those choices and or reevaluate what those choices are.
Yeah. And I
still want to make that choice?
Sometimes like, shame comes when we can't live up to our like ideological perfection. Like this is what like idealistically we would want, but like we're falling short from that idealism. And I think sometimes if we begin to really understand why, like, why is my car dirty and my house is not perfect and my kids are, like, why am I falling short? Like, sometimes there's like real answers to those questions. Like, well, you don't have, you're not wealthy and you don't have child. Like, there's reasons why. So then it's really like, it's not, I recently learned the phrase moralizing preferences. So in our society, we really have this like ideal, and we think that you're morally superior if you're living up to it. Sometimes unconsciously or subconsciously. Like
Yeah.
if you're living right and you're a good person, your life looks like this. But our lives don't look like that. And it's not because we're bad people. And it's not even because we don't idealize, like we don't share that ideal. Like that would be the ideal. But those ideals are sometimes just impossible for very material reasons. So really exploring the reasons why, for me, I can't live up to certain ideals, why I'm not going to be perfect beyond the fact that no one's perfect. That for me is very relieving to say, like this is, and then to create new ideals, so that what's right for me, what feels right for me. And then again, to make those choices, it's a pair of choices.
Yeah.
Car's
You have
not
to
gonna
replace it
today, but my kids are going to get there on time.
Yeah.
They're going to have to eat breakfast in the car.
Right. That does happen with me. Yeah. Oh, that's great. So I loved everything that we touched on, and there were so many new phrases too. What would you like to leave the listeners with?
I think something that I've encouraged people to do that I've also begun to practice is, there's an opportunity to be honest usually every day, because someone asks us, how are you doing? And I think that, I encourage us to begin to use that as an opportunity to be real. And whenever we see an opportunity to be a little more truthful than just I'm fine, do it. And then maybe also, look for when people are giving you a little crumb of of vulnerability. They're allowing themselves to be vulnerable. My husband would be like rolling his eyes completely because he's always, and I'm like, ah. But, maybe I'll practice what I'm preaching. And, when you see someone give you that little thing that that they're unsure about revealing, what if we approach that with curiosity and let them know that they're safe to share that?
That's so good. Because people do give little cues here and there.
That they'll answer that question. You'll ask, how are you? And they'll say, tough morning.
Yeah. And then you walk away.
And you're like,
right?
okay.
But instead of
deer in the headlights. So maybe just, again, using that phrase, holding space for that. And sometimes it's like, you don't have to try too hard. Like you don't have to, what happened? You can tell me, easy now. Just meet their eye. When they say that.
Yeah.
And let them be. Great. Let them be who they are, where they're at.
Yeah. I think that's great advice. Something so practical. Not the easiest thing to do to change a habit, but definitely doable.
No, and like I said, I really struggle in my marriage with doing those sorts of basic human things. Meeting someone with respect, the person you love.
But I think that's common when you get home, right? You're so depleted.
You are, and you're so caught in your own story. And for me especially, see me. What do you mean you want to be seen? It's well, how about my day and all the work I've done? And again, we're so underappreciated. We are, though.
Yeah.
But what is in 12-step program, it's let it begin with you. You be that thing, and all right, show up the way you would hope someone can show up for you. See if you can show up for them in that way.
Seems promising. I'm going to try.
I'm going to try. I'll let my husband let you know how it goes.
Yeah, we'll have his fastest job. Oh, that's great. Oh, Melissa, thank you so much for being on. It was so fun.
Oh, wow! Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and to all the listeners, thank you. Remember, practice those few things that Melissa taught us, and subscribe and like and all that fun stuff. So thank you. Bye.